Hi, friends. Welcome to Law Chat with Girija. My name is Girija Patel. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I am a podcaster. I am an educator. I am a businesswoman. I am an entrepreneur, and I'm a lawyer. I truly believe in the power of mentorship through storytelling, and that's what Law Chat is all about. So whether you are in 6 months or 10 years of business experience, we can all learn from each other's experiences because we face the same challenges and we have the victories and we have mistakes that we're all making. So why not lean into them and know that we're going to be fine and we're going to be okay and we're going to be inspired. And of course, this is Law Chat with Girija, so we will be talking about some law at some point during the conversation. And if you love what you hear today, which I know you will, then subscribe to Law Chat with Girija and share the love. So grab your coffee, sparkling water, or wine, and let's dive in to the next inspiring mentorship session. Hi, friends. Welcome to Law Chat. Raise your hand if you're a podcast junkie, lover, host, wannabe podcaster, whatever you are. I am so glad you're tuning in today because I know that today's podcast episode with our guest, Suneson, is going to be absolutely vital and helpful to your podcast aspirations. If you are somebody who is wanting to start a new podcast, already started a podcast, or is well into the podcasting years, we have an awesome guest with us today who can give us some great tips about podcasting. But more than that, I'm really excited to hear about her journey. Jenny is the founder of Savvy Podcast Agency, which is a podcast management agency. So welcome to Law Chat with Girija, Jenny. I'm so happy to have you here with us.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I love being on the other end. I host a podcast too, but it's always fun to be a guest as well. So
awesome. And what's the name of your podcast?
Oh, gosh, I actually have 3. So I have one for podcasters, which is called Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs. I have one for podcast managers, which is called Podcast Manager Power Hour. And then my third one focuses on virtual summits because I have a second business about virtual summits. And that one's called Virtual Summit Success.
That is awesome. I mean, it's crazy. It's hard to even manage one podcast. And here you are managing 3 podcasts.
I know it's crazy. Also, I lied. It's Virtual Summit Secrets. I don't know why I said success, but Virtual Summit Secrets is a third one. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll be linking all of those into the show notes later on as well. So, people can tune in because I feel like sometimes with podcasting, there is some secret sauce happening that some people figure it out and some people don't. And all the information that's being shared is actually pretty awesome. There's a lot of amazing podcasts out there. And we have a lot of people who are just, bringing out podcasts now. And it's tough. Like, I know that I have a podcast and I have a manager also, but at the end of the day, it's, when you're not seeing the rankings go up or when you're not seeing the traction and that the content is so helpful, you lose some confidence in what you're doing. Right. And so, but before we get into all of those amazing tips that you have for us, I want to talk about a little of your journey. How did you start? How did you get into podcasting?
Okay. Well, I didn't start my business and all of a sudden decide podcasting was the thing for me. As a lot of people do, we all kind of make pivots throughout our journey, but I did marketing in the corporate world and it was great. Kind of, I didn't love my job, but yeah, so that's what I did in the corporate world. And then I started doing marketing in my own business alongside of, my corporate job, which a lot of people do just because, you don't want to just quit on a whim and have no income coming in. So I did that for about 6 months. And then I ended up quitting my job and going full time with my business. That was January of 2017 is when I went full time. And I was doing the marketing thing. I was doing Pinterest management a lot, Instagram management, stuff like that. Social media management was my primary focus. And I really enjoyed it and it was fun, but it was really draining because you feel like you have to be on 24/7. And I knew in the future I did want to have kids. At that point, obviously I didn't have kids. So I was just what can we do or what can I do that is going to let me continue to do this working from home thing, but not be so on like I am with social media management? Because I felt like I was constantly on the weekends, responding to DMs and all that kind of stuff. It just felt like there was no break. And so I ended up really discovering podcasts as a listener. And I listened to a bunch of like business ones, a bunch of crime ones, a bunch of just random podcasts. And I really liked it. And I was like, maybe I should start my own podcast. I think this would be fun. Let's like, I just want to meet new people and interview guests and have solo episodes and stuff like that. So I launched my own podcast. And then from there, I just realized, wow, this is amazing. Like, obviously there has to be someone who manages all the aspects of the podcast, right? So at the time there wasn't really like, I guess there were podcast managers, but there weren't too many because it wasn't like a fully fleshed out thing quite yet. And then I started, I was doing it for myself for about 6 months and then started doing it for a client. She's like, hey, I have this podcast. I've been running it for about 10 years. I was like, whoa, I didn't even know podcasts had been around that long.
Oh my God,
So I was like, yeah, sure. I've been managing my own podcast for about 6 months. I really like it. I'd love to help you. But I basically was just like, I have experience doing it for myself. I don't have experience doing it for a client yet, but like, if you want to take a chance on me, sure, let's do it. And she ended up doing that. And then everything from there was just like, okay, I'm over this social media thing. So that was like October of 2018. And then January, maybe February of 2019, I kind of burnt my social media management business to the ground and really went all in on podcasting. And then from there, that's where we are now. I went from, I guess I was just me and an editor at that time to now me and 7 other team members. So we kind of grew a lot. And most of this growth happened actually after I had my son in June of 2020. And then by September is when I started like getting all this crazy growth. And so since September of 2020 is when really I grew my team like crazy in the past 2 years. So it's been a wild ride, but yeah, I've loved it so much. And I love podcasting. And I'm so happy that I started my own podcast because I feel like if I didn't do that, I would have never discovered this little niche of podcast management.
Yeah, I think it's so fantastic that, you are now a team of 7 and your transition from social media to podcasting also seems pretty natural, but I'm sure you had some challenges throughout the way. And when you had the social media management, was that your own business or were you working for somebody else at that time?
Yeah, it was my own business. I started it when I was working in corporate and it was just me. I was like a solopreneur and I worked for clients. I did Pinterest management primarily. I did some Instagram management. I did some like Facebook and Twitter too, but I didn't love that. So yeah, it was just me. I had a couple clients and it was fun. I mean, it really, that was my background. So it's what I was familiar with, but it just is, it's such like a fast-paced industry and you don't really like, if you're not careful, you can get really burnt out, which is what I did. So
Yeah.
I love this more like routine, consistent based work. It's just much better because it's like, you're not really putting out fires when you're managing a podcast, but when you are managing someone's social media, fires definitely can happen.
Yeah. And so, while you're managing the social media also, I know there's people out there, listeners out there that are in the middle of that transition where they might have started something and now they're like realizing, you know what, this is actually not serving me anymore. And I need to pivot into something else. So when those feelings are happening, so what were some of the signs or the signals that you internally were getting when you were in the social media, when you had your social media business, that you were like, okay, we kind of need to I need to step away from this. I need to dial this down. So what were some of the things that you were seeing as red flags?
I think the main thing was like I wasn't able to stop working. I felt like I was like waking up and as soon as I woke up, I was diving into my day and working like nonstop until night. At the time I didn't have my son yet, so obviously like I had a lot more time, so I could do that, but I didn't really want to. And I just felt like pressured that I had to do it. And I felt like if I wasn't working, my business wasn't going to grow and I wasn't making money. So I just felt so pressured to constantly be on, and literally like self-care went out the window. Like I like, what was self-care? I didn't really know what it was. I didn't even do it ever. Cause I was just so busy, like building my business. And like, I totally get that sometimes you have those seasons where you're like heavily building, heavily like launching, working your butt off, but that's not a sustainable way to be at all times, because then you just don't make time for self-care or like, prioritizing your friends and family. And like, you kind of just like let your business take over. And that's what I did. I really just let my business kind of take over, and it wasn't going to be working long term. So I was like, well, what am I going to do? So I really took a while to figure out like what is going to work for me long term. Cause I mean, you don't want to pivot every year because then you don't get known for anything. So I was like, what is going to be something that's going to work for me long term and I can stick with it and be known as and really work towards that versus like feeling like I'm switching my business every single year and no one can refer me because they don't know what I do.
Right. And that's such a key point, that when you do keep making shifts, that you are not creating a brand per se. You're not creating a steady base for your business. So it's important to show commitment to what you're doing also. And I guess it also stems from just being very thoughtful about the business you're starting. And not to say you have to continue it for the rest of your life, but at the same time, you can't just be very lackadaisical with your decision-making processes and services you're offering and not offering.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you see it all the time. People are like, oh, this week I'm selling this thing. And then like 2 months later, they're trying to sell something else. And it's like, you can definitely be multi-passionate in business and be successful, but you really have to set the foundation first before you're like trying to do a million things at once, because it's really not going to be beneficial for you or your audience when you are constantly switching to new things and chasing the shiny objects.
Right. And so when you switched over to the podcast management, was that relatively easy for you? And what were some of the challenges that you faced?
I would say, I mean, it definitely wasn't quote unquote easy, but I felt like a huge weight off my shoulders. I did keep my social media clients for a little bit. Like I kept them, even though I was like, I'm operating as a podcast agency. I'm not like offering these services to the public anymore for social media or anything. I did still keep a couple of my clients because I didn't, I wanted to make sure I built up my podcast side of things before I just like let everyone go. So that was interesting, trying to keep up with the social media people and then bring in new podcast clients because that was my new focus. But honestly, I feel like if I would have just released all of my social media clients, that would have been more overwhelming. So it was nice to kind of ease into it versus like feeling like pressured to get all these podcast clients, maybe even if they're not ideal clients, just to pay the bills. So it was nice to be able to like slowly let people go. So I kind of would bring on a podcast client that was a recurring client and then let go of one of my social media clients. And then I did that until like it was just all podcast clients.
Well, that was a really good transition strategy, is to not let go completely and keep the ones that you were like, okay, I can still keep working on this, at least to pay the bills,
right,
until you fully had a good grip on the podcast management side. That's a really smart, transition strategy. And I think that really hones into the fact that if you are transitioning, there should be some strategy there. It shouldn't just be a complete breakaway. Of course, there are situations that happen and it is a complete breakaway, and there's no shame in that. But if you can have a strategy, there's a lot of merit to that as well.
Yeah, I think it's just really helpful. And it depends on like what type of person you are. Like if you thrive with chaos, then you might be fine just getting rid of all your clients and then getting more like immediately. But for me, it was just like, I want something solid and I want to make sure that I'm able to do my part of my relationship and, be able to bring in as much, if not more than what I was making previously. So to me, that was like the best route. But I mean, if you're like someone who thrives on chaos, you might just be able to just let everyone go and get enough clients to support, even while doing that. So,
talking about the clients, there are times when sometimes social media managers or sometimes people that are working for you will just immediately say, okay, we can't do this anymore. And you're kind of leaving your client high and dry. So how did you exit out of those client relationships? And what are some tips that you would give to somebody who is in that position where they're making a shift in their business, but they have existing clients who are depending on them? So what would be your tips on transitioning, but in a way where you're still respecting the client and the work that they've given you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I feel like most service providers are inclined to continue providing a great service. Like they don't want to leave anyone high and dry. At least for me, like that feels more overwhelming to leave someone high and dry without help than it does to kind of organically phase them out. But like my entire brand and name change and stuff like that. So it was kind of obvious that I was making this pivot. So I kind of like, it's not like I just didn't tell my clients that I was shifting. Cause like if I emailed them, they would see my email address was completely different. It said podcast agency in it. So, it would be no surprise if I emailed them, they'd be like, what is this? So I had to let them know. And I just kind of told them like, hey, I'm kind of phasing out my social media clients. Don't worry. I'm here for you in the time being. Like, I definitely would never leave you high and dry. Like, let's kind of wrap up these projects or whatever. Or I would tell them like, hey, like, I actually really like working with you, if it's someone that I really enjoyed and, like, I'm not going anywhere for the time being, like that might change in the future, but I did give them that heads up. Like it wasn't going to be a permanent situation that we were going to work together, but they knew that I was still there. Especially if anyone had any like big launches or big projects coming up, I just want to make sure that I was still there and they weren't like scrambling to find someone. Cause I know how stressful it is when someone leaves in the middle of a big project or a big launch, and you are not only trying to manage that project or launch, but you're also trying to replace a team member that left.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It can be really nerve-wracking. And I say it from personal experience. And so I was just like, that happened to me some time ago. And it was very exhausting because I was in the middle of a launch and all this stuff happened. I was just like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this launch at all. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah. I think that's important. Like if you respect your client at all, you should definitely communicate that with them. It's not always the most fun or easiest conversation out there, but it really helps. And, they're more appreciative than if you're just like, all right, I'm putting my 2 weeks notice with like no reason or, anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think like, if there's no real reason to immediately exit, then it's really nice to give at least a 2-week or a month's notice, depending on what the projects are like. Because that gives them some time also to get into the headspace that they need to be in as a client and their projects. Because I feel like people are obviously outsourcing this part of their work because they don't want to do it or they can't do it. But they're expecting the expert to finish it up. Meanwhile, they're working on other stuff. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I hate to interrupt this awesome conversation, but I have to stop and talk with you about the number one thing I'm asked about by entrepreneurs: contracts. They're vital to any business relationship and to protect your business. But I also know that entrepreneurs, especially when you're starting up, money is tight. But I would never want you to compromise on a strong legal foundation. So enter yourcontractbuddy.com, a website created by me with contract templates created and drafted by me and fellow industry partners. They're ready to use and easy to plug in immediately, and they are not restricted to any specific state. So yourcontractbuddy.com is sponsoring this episode, and you and your listener can get 10% off right now with code LAWCHAT. Yes, you heard me right. 10% off right now with code LAWCHAT. And now back to our awesome conversation. So now, as you transitioned into the podcast management and you were growing that business, what were some of the growing pains that you encountered and how did you overcome them?
I think a big one back in early 2019 was that people didn't know they could hire like just a podcast manager. They would say, oh, I need a VA that does 7,000 million things and podcast editing, podcast show notes, things like that. They didn't realize that that was like a separated role or could be a separated role. And they were just trying to make their VA do everything under the kitchen sink. And, that wasn't their expertise. So it was really a big thing for me, is really educating people that that's like something that people do. And now it's a lot easier because we're in 2022 and there's lots of podcast managers out there. Obviously, there's not as many podcast managers as there are like general VAs. So it still takes a little bit of education, but that was like the main thing. And, also people like in the industry, I feel like people are going to challenge your rates at times, things like that. So yeah, I would say mainly just the education piece was tough, and like kind of trying to not convince people, but educate them on why it's important to have a dedicated podcast manager versus your VA doing everything, or why quality audio is important. Because I know, back in the day, people used to just throw out their podcast and they didn't really care about audio quality as much, but now it's a little more understood that you need at least somewhat decent quality because people aren't going to just listen to some staticky mess.
Yeah.
So just like that education piece was big. And then for me, just like getting my mindset and really like, not falling back into old habits, that was interesting, or I guess tough for me at times, because it was just like, oh, I could work until, 10 p.m. if I really wanted to, but really like trying to avoid that and making sure that I set up systems from the get-go so that that wasn't a thing. So really just like integrating it in my contracts, like, hey, we need like your episode at least 7 days in advance. If you don't get that to us 7 days in advance, then your episode may not publish on time and stuff like that. Just kind of setting those expectations and boundaries with our clients so that we didn't run into that in the future. Now, I will say if a client has an emergency and they aren't able to do the 7 days and they do it in like 5 or 4 or something, and it's not like a reoccurring thing, then we will work with them. But making sure that that's an exception, not something that we do every single time that they send us their episodes, because that can get overwhelming, especially when you have a team. Now it's not just me doing it. I have an editor, I have a show notes person. I do mainly the strategy portion. So I'm not really involved in the day-to-day stuff. It's mostly just overarching strategy. So we have a lot of team members working on stuff. So obviously 7 days is preferred because it's like you need time to move it down the line. So yeah, just like setting those expectations and boundaries, which I sucked at when I first started my business.
Yeah.
And kind of had to redo everything. Because I was like, all right, this is not how I want to operate this go around. So let's kind of put things in place from the get-go so that we don't run into that down the line. And of course, there's going to be things that you leave out of your contract and you're like, oh man, I should have put that in there.
Yeah.
But there's those learning lesson clients that I like to call them that you're like, oh man, I should have seen all these red flags and I should have done all these things. And then you just kind of, implement it going forward with new clients.
Yeah. I love that. I'm glad that you brought that up about the boundaries and the expectations. I was going to actually ask you, how did you make those shifts on the second time around where you were creating those boundaries or being intentional about self-care as well? Because I think a lot of us get into that rabbit hole sometimes and we just don't even know how to get out of it. But, it's never too late. Number one. And number two, if you are committed to the boundaries that are important to you, then it's easier to kind of, have that mindset that I need to stick to it. So one way you did that was through contracts, which I love because I think contracts is a great way to set expectations and also the parameters of that, business relationship as well. And, indirectly, you're setting boundaries as well through that contract. But what are some other ways that you set up boundaries in your business and with you in your business?
Right. Yeah. I think now it's a lot easier for me to set boundaries now that I have a child because it's like, not that I use him as an excuse, but I kind of can't. Like, oh, my son is at daycare from this time to this time. Like, I can't work after this time because he's home. So, I don't use it as an excuse, but it helps me solidify those boundaries because I don't have a choice, it's easy to fall back into those habits when you have that time, but when you don't have the time, you can't really fall into the habits. So that's a big thing for me, but I like to block out like intentional time for myself to like, get things done, or even just like, after he goes to bed, I'll set like maybe a 30-minute time period where I'm like making sure I'm doing my skincare routine. Because obviously skincare is self-care, but it's also necessary, so, and when I was in my very busy hustle days, I was even forgetting to wash my face. Like, I was brushing my teeth and stuff, but I wasn't doing like anything more than the bare minimum for myself. So just like making sure that you kind of fit it in your calendar somewhere. Like you don't necessarily have to like put self-care time from 8 to 9 p.m. or whatever. But like, if you need that, do it, it won't hurt. But yeah, just like making sure you're doing the bare minimum things plus additional stuff. So your skincare routine, making sure you're eating healthy, drinking enough water, like, working out, things like that. That's always the stuff that goes to the wayside at first because it's not a non-negotiable, but make it a non-negotiable in your business, because I feel like if we're showing up from a half empty cup, then we're not able to serve as best as we normally would be able to if our cup was completely full and we felt really rejuvenated. So just like little things like that, just like the bare minimum things that you don't really think about, like getting enough sleep. I think just trying to prioritize those things and really allowing ourselves to show up as our best self versus letting our clients dictate everything. And even things like, I know for me, like I put my phone on do not disturb once it's like 7 p.m. or so. So I just try not to respond to anything. I used to actually have some of my clients would text me, and I said, sorry, I know I let this boundary slip in the beginning, but we're not doing that. That was with my social media clients. I don't have any podcast clients that have my phone number, but and just things like that. Like if you're finding yourself letting like things slip, it's not too late to course correct and make that happen. It might be a harder conversation because your client does get used to those things that you're allowing them to do, but it's important to course correct and really just say like, hey, like, I know I was allowing this before, but honestly, like, I can't do this aspect anymore. Please communicate with me via Slack or via email or whatever. And really just try to reset that boundary, even though it's a little challenging at times.
I love that. I love that having that candid conversation of, I know I allowed this, but actually it just doesn't work for myself or my business. And this is the preferred method. It might be a hard conversation. It might be difficult, but it's necessary. But the more you do it, the less difficult it becomes as well.
Right.
I really like that tip of yours. And, going into the podcast world now, I myself am a podcaster. I know that a lot of the listeners that are out there, they're also either wanting to start a podcast even, or maybe they're on the fence about it, or maybe they've just started. What are some tips that you would give to podcasters or podcast hosts on, there's so many things that go into the whole podcasting world, but just in general, like when you're first starting, what are some of the tips that you would give them?
I mean, there's a lot of things. I know people get hung up on the equipment and all the little tiny details. Honestly, you don't need a fancy microphone. Like the microphone that I have, I think it was like a $99 bundle. It came with a microphone, headphones, which I'm not using today, but I typically do use, are like the big ones. It came with like a pop filter for the microphone. It came with a stand. It came with a bunch of stuff. And I think it was like $99. So you don't need a fancy microphone. You don't need like a $500 microphone. You don't need like fancy headphones. You don't need any of that. Honestly, as long as you have a good microphone that is not, you don't have to break the bank, but just a microphone that is not like your Apple earbuds microphone. And honestly, you need to just have a really positive mindset, because you are going to run into some blocks. I know some people are like, well, I hate my voice. Why would I start a podcast? I don't like how I sound. That's definitely a mindset block that a lot of people face. And then, people are like, I don't have a huge audience, like, things like that. Just like kind of be ready and prepared for those mindset blocks that you're going to run into. But honestly, the main thing is the content. Like, obviously, good audio quality is important, but if you have crappy content, amazing audio quality is not going to do you any justice. So like really focus on the content that you're putting out there. Like make sure it kind of goes hand in hand with your business, unless your podcast is a complete hobby and you don't care that it relates to your business. But that's something a lot of people do. They start their podcast and then they realize, oh, wait, this doesn't make any sense with my business. It's not bringing me leads. It's not doing anything. Like, why am I even doing this? So kind of like really just take the time to really think about that from the beginning. Think about why you want to start the podcast, what your goal is, how it's going to tie back to your business, all those different aspects, and really just think about it and use that when you're thinking about your content planning and planning out your content for the year, for the month, for the quarter, and just be really intentional with it, because you don't want to start a podcast and then get 20, 30 episodes in and realize that it's literally just adding more work to your plate and not resulting in any new clients, any new course students, anything really.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think, with the podcast, aside from, if you're looking at the metrics or the ROI, the return on investment of your podcast, having it as, if you're looking at it as intentional as you were talking about, the purpose behind you starting it, of course, having conversion of the listener to become your client is one. I also believe that, there's other aspects why you might want to start one, which would be to create authority for yourself,
right.
Create presence for yourself in the industry. If you have the time and you have the ability, and it can also create some clout when you are trying to, put some, be a speaker somewhere or, publish yourself somewhere. So it kind of adds value to your resume, for lack of a better way of putting it. At the end of the day, is that what you want? Like you said, think about the purpose of why you're starting and be intentional about that with every single podcast and the way you're also marketing it. So now shifting to the marketing side of it, I think that can be kind of tough. So what are some of your tips on marketing your podcast?
I would say, well, first off, don't try to put out too many episodes a week because then you're going to lack in your marketing because you don't have enough hours in the day to promote 2 to 3 episodes a week. So stick with maximum of 1 episode a week. You can do bi-weekly if that works better for you, but 1 episode a week max, because you're going to get burnt out. You don't have this huge production team behind you. You can't put out 3 episodes a week. That's just insane. So stick with 1. So start there, but just make sure you're actually promoting it. What we do for our clients typically is we'll create 3 different types of graphics. So we'll create a quote graphic. So we pull a quote from the episode to share on social. We do an audiogram, so just like a little clip from the episode to kind of entice people to listen. And then we do kind of like the podcast announcement, which typically goes out the day that the episode goes live. And that's just kind of like a picture of the host and the title, or the host and the guest and the title, or whatever you want that to be. So we try to get our clients, or we get our clients to promote 3 times, but we suggest that to everyone, even if they're not working with us. So each episode gets 3 promotions, because not everyone on your social media is a listener. And even if they are, they may not be like a podcast listener that is in their app 24/7. So they may not know that you even released a new episode. So you're going to feel like you're talking about a lot, but it's at the end of the day, not everyone sees everything that you post. So those 3 posts kind of ensure that you're really giving each episode the promotion that it deserves. And you can even get on your stories too and like talk there on Instagram, just little clips like, hey, new episode went live today. Here's 3 key points we talked about. Head over. Now that they have the link feature in stories, that really makes it easy to promote.
Love
as
that
well.
feature.
So much easier. Like, honestly, I don't know why they didn't do it sooner. So just things like that. It's hard sometimes, but I think the easy thing about it, or for me at least, it's my main form of content. Podcasting is for all facets of my business. So I use what I'm talking about on the podcast to create my Instagram and all other social content. So I think that's, if you're, your main form of content is a podcast, it makes it so much easier to market, because you have that consistent content every week or every other week that you can pull from, and you're not just like pulling things out of thin air to talk about on social. So make sure that you're giving each episode the attention that it deserves, because it's really going to help, see improvements across the board when it comes to your downloads.
Do you suggest getting on stories and promoting it and talking about it? Or, I mean, like, I know there's this thing, like you have to call to action on the podcast also. Like during the podcast, you have to ask people to follow and subscribe and share. But sometimes it just feels like, I mean, I do it when I'm doing my Law Chat 101s, which is just quick legal tips on YouTube. And sometimes I feel really awkward because I'm just like, gosh, like, of course I want you to subscribe. So
right.
Are there some buzzwords that we should be saying or not saying when we are, recording?
I think it's important to just be organic with it. Like, don't force it in there, but if it naturally comes up, like I know for myself, at least for my podcast for podcasters, if I'm talking about a certain topic in the episode, and then I have another episode that I already did in the past that, is complimentary, then I'll say like, oh, in episode 87, we talked about XYZ, like you can go listen to it here, and I link it in the show notes, and I try to make it organically flow. Right. Or if it's like kind of that kind of thing, but if it's like an actual like launch, I try to, I insert it in the middle typically, and I make sure that everyone knows that it's going to be like a quote unquote ad segment by having some kind of like music overlay or something, just so like if they want to skip it, they can. I don't want to feel like I'm like forcing someone to listen to it if they don't have to, and trying to be clever with it. I'd much rather people listen if they want to. And if they don't, go ahead and fast forward. It doesn't bother me, but just be organic with it. Be fun about it. It doesn't have to be stuffy just because you are promoting something. Like, don't make it a million years long either. I would say like a minute 15, a minute 30 max. I mean, mine are typically even shorter than that because it's like no one wants to listen to you ramble on about your product. Like if they're interested, they'll go to the URL and check it out.
Exactly.
So I think that's important. Not really any like specific words to say, but just like do what feels good for you. I'm not a hard sell person personally, so like anything like that I really avoid, but I think like kind of integrating it in a more fun and casual way really helps me because it doesn't feel as salesy and it doesn't feel as like bro marketing, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So
Oh gosh, I love all your tips. They're so helpful because sometimes when you're starting, it's just confusing and you don't know what to say or how to do it. And also growing your audience can be tough. Now, just quickly, I know that there's, gurus out there that are like, okay, you should have people, write reviews and then you'll get more traction. You'll have people share. Are there some things that you believe are like hard yeses that this is absolutely the things you need to get done in order to make your podcast go up the rankings?
honestly, like podcast reviews are helpful, but they're not gonna like skyrocket you in your rankings. It's not like an instant ticket to to high downloads. I mean, I think it's nice to have because people can read those before deciding to listen. So I think that is beneficial in that aspect. And I will sometimes read reviews and see like, oh, is this a podcast I want to listen to before I hit subscribe? But they're not really like the be all end all thing. And it doesn't really help you like much on like the rankings at all. Honestly, a lot of the rankings are just like really popular business owners, at least in the business category.
Mhm.
So it's not like, and that's not something I would strive for. Cause like a lot of my clients, like they do get in the rankings and that's great, but they have like more niche shows like the business category, especially, most of us listening probably do have some kind of business focused podcast. So it's going to be harder to get ranked in the top 200 or whatever, just because there's so many business podcasts. But honestly, don't let that deter you. Just like really just make sure that you are very authentic and you're getting guests that you enjoy and you're going to have a great conversation with, not just bringing them on because they're going to boost your downloads. Obviously, that is a benefit and a bonus, but it shouldn't be the reason that you bring someone on as a guest because yeah, people, and a lot of the time those big name people don't even promote anyway. So it's like, cool, you had them on, but it's not like they're sharing it with their audience. So it doesn't like it helps you get cool guests, but it doesn't always like boost your downloads like you think it will. So just focus on really just staying true to yourself and your purpose and your vision for your show and your business in general. And just try not to focus on those vanity metrics. I know people get really wrapped up in that and they're like, oh, my podcast only has like 50 downloads per episode or something. But think about that. If you're in a room with 50 people listening to you every single week, that's a lot of people. Like that is a lot. Like don't diminish your smaller numbers because someone else who has a huge audience has millions of downloads. Like you can make a similar impact. You may not make as much as them, but you can have a similar impact with just 100 listeners. You don't need thousands of listeners to be profitable and feel successful. So
great advice. Thank you for that. So now before we wrap it up, I have a few questions. And one of those questions is, what is your anchor when things are just chaotic around you? What holds you steady?
That's a good question. I feel like usually I will just kind of, when I feel stressed out, I will binge like reality TV, which is probably not the best thing to do, but honestly, it makes me feel better because those people's lives are way more chaotic than mine. So it makes me feel a lot better. But usually I'll do that and I'll probably eat a snack, like my favorite snack, probably some ice cream or something, and just try to calm down. Or I'll go on a walk and clear my head. That always works too. But sometimes I'll also just throw myself into work too, because it's like I don't want to think about what's happening. So it depends on really like what the scenario really is,
Yeah.
as to what I do. Like if it's like really hard, I might cry about it and eat some ice cream, but it's just something like a little small challenge. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to throw myself into work harder and just continue bettering whatever I need to better versus getting too wrapped up in it. So,
Nothing like a good ice cream. What is one of your favorite books, whether it's business related or self or fiction, doesn't matter?
yeah, I haven't read in like a while. I mean, I'm starting to get back into it, but I really love like anything kind of mystery thriller novels. Like I'm all about those kind of books. I don't necessarily have a favorite, but I did read one called Verity. I think it was last year I read it, and it's really good, by Colleen Hoover. And everyone is talking about her
Everybody's
lately.
talking
Like,
about it. I actually
yeah.
just bought some to hand it out to some of my friends. I've yet to read it, but
Everyone's talking about Colleen Hoover. I don't know what it is. Like I read her books. I've started reading her books maybe 2 years ago, but in the past like 6 months, she has blown up like no other.
yeah, Verity. I had a friend who was like, "Oh gosh, it's a great book. It was hard to put down. I've yet to read it, but they loved the book."
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of business books, I really like the You're a Badass at Making Money, those kind of books.
Yeah,
And then, like I liked Traction a lot.
oh, I love traction.
So yeah, there's like I love to read. I just don't make time for it as much as I used to, but I'm trying to change that this year. I have a goal to read 24 books, and
Yeah,
I've only read 2 so far, so I'm a little behind, but
it
I
happens.
think I
I
can catch
mean,
up.
you also have a 20-month-old.
Yes.
There's a lot on there's a lot on your plate, and it's tough. I remember when my kids were much younger and it was hard. I think I forgot what reading was. Like I forgot completely that there's a thing called reading. And then the biggest gift I gave to myself years after was the Kindle. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can
Mm-hmm.
read at night now because,
Right.
there was no light. I can't read the book. And I never
Yep.
like
Yeah.
thought about getting a Kindle until few years later. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And I read
Right.
nobody else's business. Like I read all these
Yeah.
books and it was just so wonderful. Well, how can the listeners reach out to you and connect with you?
Yeah. So the best place to find me is Instagram. So my handle is Jenny, JENNY so a period, and then SUNESON. That's the place I hang out the most. And then my website for my agency is Savvy Podcast Agency. So if you're looking to start a podcast or grow your podcast, I'd love to chat with you and help you do that, because podcasting is where it's at. It's so much fun.
It is. I mean, I have to say, my podcast doesn't really talk a lot about the law. We hit on it ever like in between the conversations. Like this time also we talked about the contracts, which is, otherwise I'll be straight out asking like, so what is, the legal side of your business? Like, I think you talked about it, about the contracts and helping you create boundaries, but expectations and, also keeping it consistent in your business and your processes. But I think, podcasting, if anything, it has connected me to individuals that I would have never connected to otherwise. And I have met the most amazing humans. I'm just like, the world is filled with awesome people and the world, because I have people from all over the world coming on as guests, and it's been such a blessing. And so if it's something that you really want to do, even if it doesn't boost your business, but it's something that you really find joy in, do it.
Yeah, I love it's very true. And you will boost your business, especially even if it's not like crazy downloads, like I was talking about earlier. Like those connections are super valuable. Like I've had people on my podcast that have gone on to be in my summits, have gone on to refer me to clients. So, even though you're putting in all this work and you may not feel like you're getting like direct clients from it at first, those connections are going to bring you those clients and things down the road. So don't negate those connections. They are very, very beneficial.
Absolutely. Thank you for being on Law Chat with Girija. I love talking to you and all the great tips that came out of you. Thank you so much for your wisdom.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you so much for joining Law Chat with Girija. I just love these kind of conversations that are motivating, inspiring, but truthful, raw, and honest about all of the challenges, all of the victories, all of the triumphs, picking ourselves back up again. I just can't think of a better way to get mentorship but Law Chat with Girija. If this was helpful to you or this was inspiring to you, please share the love. You can give this video a thumbs up. You can subscribe to this channel. You can also share this with your community by taking a screenshot and posting it on your social media and tagging GBP Law. When you do that, a lot more people will be able to see this video that not only benefited you, but also can benefit them as well. So let's share that love and let's share that inspiration. And if you want more information about what I do and other resources, go check out gbplaw.com or yourcontractbuddy.com. And I look forward to seeing you next time.